I'm thoroughly delighted to be hosting this one because Nigel and I go back a long, long way, actually to the last century, I think.
Worryingly true.
Yes, and I think one of my early memories of Nigel was in the 1990s, and we both worked for the same company, a company called Pinder, over in Scarborough. It was based in Scarborough anyway. And Nigel was the managing director of the large printing company there, and I was a salesperson. And I remember one evening we had a customer event, and I was in the hotel room, and I had a knock at the door, and a very flustered Nigel came in his dinner jacket, and you know, I could see he had a lot of concern on his face, and he said, I have no cufflinks. Luckily, I always carry 2 sets of cufflinks.
True story. I have a habit of that as well. I seem to have accumulated all sorts of people's cufflinks. I obviously need to get better at that.
I really saved Nigel's dignity.
Yeah. I'm not sure where my cufflinks going there, Richard.
I don't know. Anyway, but you know, over the years we've worked closely together, and when I started my business, Nigel was a key mentor to me, which meant I occasionally took him out and brought him an Indian or a Chinese, and we had copious amounts of alcohol, and he really did help me make my business a success. So that was his payback for my cufflinks. Now, Mark Fordyce, he gave a presentation a couple of months ago. One of the things he said which resonated with me was, you know, life is too short not to work with people you don't like. And one of the things with Nigel is that we're very good friends. Well, hopefully we are.
I vouch for that. I vouch for that. Anyone who gives me cufflinks at short notice is definitely a friend.
Exactly. And yeah, so we are very good friends, and that really helps in business. But the other thing which really helps in business is to be good. And Nigel is by far the best enterprise salesperson I have known. And I've known a lot of them. So I am really looking forward to this presentation.
Wow, that's a billing and a half. I don't know if I can live up to that, but thank you, Richard. That's very generous of you. And I would likewise say how much I've enjoyed our time of working together. And yes, I remember late calls and some of the frustration. Pinder was a large organisation, family-owned organisation, and those who've worked in family businesses will know they're a little bit special and have some quite interesting political dimensions. And Richard and I would spend many an hour, him in Chicago, me in the UK, and another thing, keeping each other sane. So that was fantastic. Well, as I say, very generous of you. And I also, just before I start, I wanted to say, you know, a big thank you to Sergey, to Ben, and Richard's been closely involved, and others. Sergey's not here, but just for setting this up, for setting Tech York up, because I think it's really a great forum for us to be able to get together. I mean, I'm in international sales, as sort of Richard's intimated at, and certainly have for a lot of my career. So although I call York my home, I'm not often conducting my business in York. I'm doing things remotely, or I'm traveling. So it's really nice to feel part of this community, and I do feel part of this. So that's great. So when Richard and Sergey and Ben asked me to do this presentation, it was about I suppose it was just before Christmas, I think it was, when you came up and said, would you do one of these? And I said, yeah, sure, be happy to. What were you thinking I could cover? And I said, well, we're thinking sales. I said, right, sales. Okay, well, wow, that's a big topic. Any particular aspect of sales that we were thinking? You know, negotiation or price or, sales methodologies? Yeah, any of that? So I sort of went away and thought about it and thought, okay, well, what angle should I take this evening? And I came to the conclusion that if I take any one of those, there's bound to be someone in the room who knows a bit more than I do. So I thought, well, I'll steer clear of that, and I'll just do a more general overview of some of the things that I've picked up in my 40 years of selling and how they've applied themselves in different ways as I've moved forward to end up where I am now, because it literally is a journey from tights to technology. So by way of introduction, Richard sort of explained how we know each other. I've worked for a variety of different businesses, but just to level set where I am now, I'm the Senior Vice President of Sales for an enterprise software business in the US called Loftware. About 550 people, about 100 million, 105 million this year if we meet our number. And basically I run the enterprise sales for EMEA and APAC, and that consists of salespeople out in the region, basically selling to enterprise customers and engaging with those sales processes, and I'm basically managing that team and that line of business. So one other thing I would just like to talk about, just say is, if you're in the room thinking you're going away with some killer way of always cracking a deal and securing the deal, sorry, better leave now. There's probably better places to be. But hopefully there might be one or two things that you that pick up on the way that are of interest. But let me start just by sales as a profession, because I came into selling. When I came into selling, when I said to my parents, "Yep, I'm going to get into sales," there was a sort of slight look of, really? And to be honest, part of the reason was education wasn't my thing either. I wasn't the world's best at getting engaged and paying attention at school. So the fact that the entry requirements and the qualifications bar was very low suited me just fine. And so, hence I started my career in sales. But what I would say is that, the career progression against such lofty professions as law, engineering and medicine is pretty similar. And I think what my career has shown is that is indeed a possibility. You can progress, and sales is often at the heart of everything. Although I've done individual sales, I've done sales leadership, I've done business unit management, and Richard mentioned I've done a managing director's role. In all of that, I've always had an eye to business development, and I'm apt to remember the phrase by a guy called Thomas Watson, Senior, from IBM back in the 70s, when he said, basically, nothing happens until someone sells something. And I think that's so very, very true when we're apt to remind, if we ever think that sales isn't a profession that we should be proud of being involved in. So, without further ado, basically what I'm going to try and do is cover a few things, hit on a few things. I'm going to start with the basics, where it all began for me. Then talk about new business acquisition. Most of the time, that's a real problem for salespeople. It's dressed up, because really it's cold calling. Salespeople hate cold calling, in my experience. I would put myself in that bracket as well. And next to, of course, filling in CRM systems was the other thing that none of us like. CRM, sorry for those who don't like, is customer relationship management. Then getting emotional. There was a day, and I think for many in this room have probably been involved in, what I would call the SME market, which it's got all of its own challenges, is that, there's a lot of personal contact. And, there was a saying once that relationship selling was so very important. And relationships are still important, but the way you do that has changed, because people talked about business on the golf course. Well, realistically, certainly in enterprise sales, that's a no-no. People are just not allowed to spend time outside fraternising, it's seen, with a potential supplier. But there is still an important dimension, and I'd like to hit upon that when I get to it. And then what I see is this journey in selling, from being the sort of hard-nosed seller when I first started in the profession, which I was not particularly happy with, through to more of the consultative sale, which is where I'm probably more comfortable. So this is where it all started. I had the expression at the time that I travelled in ladies' underwear, because basically I worked for Pretty Polly. And Pretty Polly at the time were the largest sales force in the UK, strangely. And this was me, and by the way, in the time, cars were an enormous thing. It was a huge status symbol. So here I am in my very basic Cavalier, and I aspired to be in an L, a GL or a GLT, or even a Gear. Wow, then I knew I'd arrived. I got a cassette player, and I got a sunroof, and all these luxuries. So that was my office as well. It was more like a mobile skip, to be perfectly honest. But anyway, Within that, the basic essentials of my life were an order pad, a map, more precisely an A to Z, and a whole stack of account record cards. And those were what I would basically sequence to do my journey. And the real critical thing here was covering your territory. So this was my territory up in southwest London. And bear in mind, in this day and age, I lived in Sussex, so I was driving up every day, although I did in the end stay overnight because it was miserable. Traffic was really bad. This is a time, believe it or not, there's no M25. Shock horror. So we're talking a long, long time. I could see someone looking aghast there. No M25, really? Yes, no M25. So you had to be really good at planning out how you covered that territory in the right way. And I was calling on customers from, supermarkets. At the time, we'd managed to capture the Asda account, which was a big deal. And they were selling a lot of tights. And right down to a CTN, as they were called at the time, a confectionery tobacco newsagent business. And you wouldn't be calling on those very often. These are the little McColls, Martins in the back end of, little housing estates. And the idea was you had to, as I say, cover all of these in the most efficient way without spending all your life in a car or in your mobile skip. And so that, as I say, planning that out was really, really important and getting that call cycle. And of course, I had a quota in those days, or a target, call it what you like, basically a lump of business that I had to deliver. And I believe dozens of tights. I still smile to myself when I think I was selling dozens of tights, and it was in dozens. So I can't remember my exact target now, but it was about 1,000 dozen a week. So, and the minimum order quantity, I can still remember that sadly, was 12 dozen. So you do the maths, you've got to get 17 sales basically out of an average day. Of course, some more than others. Naturally, a supermarket was doing more than my aforementioned CTN. But what I learnt there as well from that, apart from, as I say, getting that call cycle right, making sure you're hitting all of those, inevitably you'd find customers that really wanted to work with you and would do the preparation. So you'd turn up and they'd already, merchandised the stand, they'd worked out the stock cards and everything else, and it correlated with what you had. So it was all very civilized. The other end of the spectrum, of course, is people totally disorganised. It's in the stock room, mate. If you saw anyone, go and find it if you can. So that, that tremendous variety of customer. And one of the things it taught me is, although these customers might be great to be with, and I'm sorry, the other thing they would give you is a cup of tea. Have a cup of tea. Oh, fantastic. So sit down, have a cup of tea. But in terms of achieving your business objectives, it doesn't always marry the fact that you've got an account that wants to work with you, because it might just not have the pot of business to give you. So it was not going to give me sufficient order of tights to meet my quota. So that was something that I think I picked up on pretty early. And the other one is if people are, shouting. So I'd phone an order through in an evening, and one of the office ladies would say, "Oh, by the way, you've had some Martins in the back end of nowhere's complaining they haven't seen anyone for weeks." I said, well, they're not going to see anyone for weeks. Don't order anything, when you look at your order card. And so the other thing I've learned was, and I don't do it as routinely as we should do, but there is such thing as bad business for salespeople. And salespeople do get absorbed and drawn into too much bad business. And I think sometimes you have to really sit down and evaluate where you're spending your time. And although I've talked very much about a very manual, non-digital process, that sort of carries forward into my world today in enterprise selling. So now I am selling solutions typically start at a price of around about $50,000 and go up to, in fact, we just closed a deal in the US. I wish it was here in Europe, but it was 5.9 million in one sale. So that's the sort of range of sale that we're doing. So as a consequence, we put a lot of attention and thought into what and how we do this. Now, these are illustrative. I'm not going to read through them. I'm not expecting you to absorb all of this, but just the way that we go about planning now. So I'm transferring that contact record cards and that filing cabinet into the approach we take today. So this is an example for our channel business, which is one way we go to market of a territory roadmap. And what I'm really trying to play up here is quantifying what your universe looks like, whatever that is, and being clear about that as a seller. I often compare it almost to, so the company is setting often the price the product, the service that you can deliver, the operational support. So the thing that the salesperson has in their gift is really, it's like a franchise. How do they run that territory to get the most out of it? And so, having a good, clear plan is really, really important. And whether it's, in this case, it's UK, but it could be, a vertical. I could be, concentrating on chemical as an industry, or it could be a process. I could be in a warehouse and I want to sell to people with warehouses. Whatever it is, but quantify it and really understand, where you are now, where do you want to be, where do you aspire to be, what are the things that make you stand out from the crowd. And it's important for you as a seller, but also sales is a team sport, in my opinion. And it's really important that you're able to then bring in the other people from the organisation to support you in what you're trying to achieve. The most obvious being marketing, but there's also typically operations, and for us, there's a professional services dimension. And then once you've sort of sussed out your territory, whatever that looks like, and really been able to understand where the opportunities are, they normally come in the shape of an account. And an account for us, I could have spent 20 minutes on this, probably bored you all rigid, but this is something that we've really taken to heart as a selling team, and I see increasingly in enterprise sales, is this idea of what we call an account intelligence framework. So again, I'm not going to walk all the way through here, but I just want to pick up on a couple of points to emphasize. One thing is first of all, you've got to understand what you've got in the account. So in some situations, we have small point sales that have been done in those accounts, so we need to understand that they're there. In other cases, it's white space. By white space, I mean you've got nothing there. But whatever it is, you've got to understand where you are and what is the total size of the prize. We talk about being wall to wall in a customer. How do I achieve wall to wall? Because if you're going to invest this sort of intelligence and time in driving into an account, you've got to be sure that it's worth the effort when you get there. So really being clear on that. The next thing then is what's going to trigger a reason for them to engage with you. So our solutions are sitting around supply chain, product identification in supply chain. Sounds very fancy. Basically, it's labeling, barcode labeling, and product marking identification through continuous inkjet and lasering devices. So, and it's the software that drives that. So we're really interested in the supply chain. So anything where people say supply chain 4.0, or we've got a supply chain modernization project or program, that's definitely a signal for us. The other thing is a business system change, and we've spent quite a bit of time, and it's something I would advise others to look at what's in your ecosystem. I'm sorry, it's one of those crass terms, isn't it, that we keep using. Who's around you in technology-wise, and who can influence what you do positively, clearly. Now, we formulated a very strong relationship with SAP because they're a key part of what we, where we work. So we're looking for those modernizations of an ERP system, an enterprise resource planning, or a manufacturing execution system, or a warehouse management system. Those moves are really good signals for us to engage with a customer. And then the final point I'd say is organizational mapping. And I refer back to my earlier point about dealing with customers you like. What my observation with salespeople is they will find someone, normally a champion, someone who will talk to them, and they'll stick to them like glue. And they will believe everything that person is telling them as if it's the only fact that can exist, and it's the only version of truth. And I really challenge my team on that factor, because it rarely is. It is their perspective. And in an organisation that we're typically dealing with, 500 million and above, but I would wager any business that's of 50 million or above has the same. There's a political landscape, there's things that are happening and occurring. So you've really got to move beyond the person that you first engage with and understand who are the players and actors in there. And if you don't know them, you should be at least mapping out who are the personas, to use that expression. I think most people are familiar with that from, website development. Who are the people that you would identify with? So for us, it's quality, it's, senior supply chain people, senior people in IT are all the ones that we're trying to to find and understand and build that out. And then there's a whole nother level around power map. Where does the power lie and how do you apply yourself to that power? And it's really then for a salesperson to use all of the resources in the company to address each of those people, because you've got to be seen as what I call multi-level selling in that situation. So then, you know, once you've done all that, and I'll come to the move the needle, which is the latest iteration a little later, then you get on to the opportunity. You know, with an opportunity, typically what we find within an account is that we're selling probably more than once. So I talked about the ultimate size of the prize. We rarely get to do that in one go. We're trying to do that more and more, but normally we have some form of starting project. And we'll map out this opportunity and this is a page out of our Salesforce system, and you can see some letters dotted around. I don't know if anyone recognises those as an acronym, maybe the sellers in the room. So actually, because of the way they're dotted around where we capture the information, it's not very clear, but it's MEDIC. Does anyone know the MEDIC process? You're familiar with that? Okay, so it's not actually a process, I have to correct myself, it's a qualification. Has anyone got any external investment in their company? No, okay. Well, I find, having worked now, Richard and I had the joy of working with a venture capitalist. I've since worked with private equity in a couple of situations. I'm now with a private equity business. They are absolutely focused on predictable delivery of revenue. So, and we all know things happen when you're managing opportunities, but the clearer you can be in how you are managing that, the better. So the things that get really honed in on are metrics. You know, for us, it's things like, you know, number of label changes that they make, how many products they introduce. These sorts of things are drivers for their business. And usually there's then some level of pain associated around that if we're to be interesting to them, and identifying and quantifying that pain is really, really important. And then the next thing, which talks to what I was saying with the, investors, is a mutual plan. Too often I see, our sellers will just wait for the next call. They'll wait for the next discussion. Oh yes, we're going to reconnect in another week and have another discussion. Fantastic. What about the weather? It just isn't moving the process forward. So we call this a mutual close plan. And in America it works. In Europe you have to. I call it a proposed sequence of events, to be honest, because it's less challenging and hostile to a European audience. Because the Americans are quite happy. Yeah, sure, we'll close it. Europeans are a bit more. And really, you then have to, get the customer to give you a fixed date. So when have we got to get this done by? What's the absolute drop-dead date for you to get this achieved by? And then you step back from that, all of the sequences. And it's quite surprising how many steps that you have to go through in a multi-level selling process. And before you know it, you can see yourself, oh my God, I got 6 months of activity here. Am I realistically forecasting this to close at the right point? Because if I'm not, better do it, move it now, is my message to the sales team, because once it's in focus to close, it is, Andrea knows, I spend every Friday on a forecast call, and it is a bloody affair, typically when things move. So, and that obviously isn't as consequential for some of you in the room, but I do still think there's solid advice there to, understand what the end date is, when is the customer want to go live, and work back and really let them see what's involved. Okay, I know I'm probably running a little long here. So, cold calling. So this used to be okay, would you believe it? Feet on the desk would probably be okay now, actually. Some of the people I see in my Slovenian office with their flip-flops, they're sort of sat there, life's cool. But smoking, I mean, it's a bit of a dodgy photo, but there is a fag on. So yours truly would sit on the phone with a fag on back in this has been late 80s, and I was selling to advertising agencies and graphic design companies a whole host of equipment to basically fit out their creative studios. And every year we do 2 events a year and basically try and get studio managers, creative directors, these sorts of people to come into our facility and show them the product and say, wow, isn't this fantastic? Wouldn't you like to buy some of that? and we were just hammering the business pages or the yellow pages. I mean, literally 150, 200 calls a day, all the time, just banging out, trying to get those appointments and get those people to come along. Thankfully, in a way, it has changed from those days, because it wasn't good for my health apart from anything else. But now this is some cut and pastes of just to give an illustration of some of the things, the metrics that are going on. Does anyone use HubSpot? We don't use HubSpot. Great. Well, if you probably get even more insight, but this is, some snips from HubSpot. What I really like about HubSpot is that they give you data points from their install base. So you get a real idea, this is real data of what's working and what's not working. And I think that's really insightful. Salesforce don't give as many, at least we're not exposed to those sorts of data points. And I think that's really very, very helpful. But the phone still gets, it's getting ignored. And I think there's a real, clarion call, a real, drive from everyone that we should be getting on the phone more than we currently do. I mean, I'm forever, having to go at my guys because they're always, I sent them an email. Pick up a phone, talk to them for goodness sake. And, I'm not going to go deeply into the stat, but it's just down there. 78% of decision makers polled have taken an appointment or attended an event that came from a cold call. I mean, hands up, I'm guilty. I did an event, 6 weeks ago in the Netherlands, and that was as a result of someone outbound cold calling me and saying, do you want to participate? So it can work. You've just got to be relevant and make sure that you're targeted in doing it. But it is one of many things, and that's true for a seller now. It's got to be much more adept at understanding the social media tools. An old fossil like me, I'm still trying to get myself, attuned to all that goes on. We're using a lot around intent data, marketing intent data, which I'm sure to many of you is, yep, do that, thank you very much. We use 6 Sense. It's not as effective in Europe as it is in America. In America, it's incredible, to be perfectly honest, the level of detail that you can get to in terms of understanding what people are looking for, what search terms they're using, what sites they've visited, what assets they've downloaded. It's a real full picture. Europe, it's not. It's a bit more patchy. But certainly, understanding and being attuned to those touch points. I think it was McKinsey, I think everyone knows McKinsey, the management consultant, said that in the last 5 years, the number of touch points has increased from 5 to 10. So it's a real, there's a real shift in how many different ways that a customer's coming into you. The other thing I would say is don't get lost in the technology. When I was doing a little prep for this, 570 different applications in 43 categories of sales and marketing. Can you believe that? You could spend a day, every day of the year, and you still wouldn't get through them. So yeah, don't get lost in space there, I would. This is Gartner. I think some will have heard of Gartner. This is, to me, an interesting stat and a quite challenging stat when you see it. A lot of the investigation now is done by outside of talking to a supplier. So what it's saying is that only out of a buying group, only 17% of their time is spent interacting with a supplier. And frighteningly, I saw that other little data point when I was looking at Gartner. We're a subscriber. Sales surveys find 61% of B2B buyers prefer not having a rep involved at all. So it means you've got to really be able to add and create value. And typically what we see when a customer comes ready or a prospect to talk to us is all they want to do is 2 things. Demo, show us what it does, because we don't give a freemium offer, and price. Well, it's really hard to differentiate on those two. If you're differentiating on price, shame on you, really. So you've got to find different ways to get to connect once you do get them coming to you. So contextualizing information, I'm forever, getting my team to be thinking more about how do they express the solution that we're offering in terms of other customers that we're serving today. How do we make it real? How do we story tell is another thing that you'll hear more and more people talking about. Navigating complexity, for us, we integrate to multiple points. So really helping the customer understand, because you send them some wonderful diagram of all these interconnections and you serve to confuse them at integration points. So really helping them understand and demystifying that is important. And of course, how you orchestrate your internal resources. I talked a little bit about that before, but you know, if you're playing a team game, which you should be, you can use those resources to show the strength and depth that you've got within the organisation. I know I'm talking to small businesses here, so you know, sometimes people have to wear more than one hat, but certainly how they approach the call and how they approach the process is important. Just conscious of time, so emotional connection, I touched a little bit on this before. I think the thing that you know, strikes me, did anyone ever do NLP, neuro-linguistic programming? Yeah, okay. I wasn't the thing I spent enormous personally time on, but I know there's a big body of work in there. But the notion of what the personal value is important, regardless of, you know, any process to understand it more deeply. And one of the things that I think I'm certainly encouraging our sales team is to understand what the personal win is for that individual that you're interacting with, because it can be very, very different. The almost obvious one that is really great to work with is someone who's enthusiastically trying to get a promotion or trying to see this as an opportunity to enhance their career. Fantastic, because you're equipping them to do that. But all too often, you actually, unless you really, you know, dig, you can actually be finding yourself facing off against someone who's been handed a project they'd rather not have, and they're stuck with it and thinking, how the hell can I get out of this with the least amount of risk? The way that you approach those two individuals has to be different as a seller, because you've got a reassuring job to do on the other, and you know, make them stand out in lights with the former. So I think it's really critical that people understand, and that's irregardless of size of organisation. So I said I wasn't going to talk too much about sales methodologies, but I have to, in order to just frame where we're going. Certainly I see the technology, as I say, enterprise technology sales migrating to. So we started on the left-hand side with the traditional sales approach I talked about earlier, which was all about, you know, hard sell closing techniques. And you know, things like, you know, what colour would madam like, blue or red? You know, I mean, it was really, really very naff in the approach. Or alternatively, oh, when do you need it by? Well, next Tuesday. Well, then you need to order it now if we're going to get it to you to Tuesday, and all this sort of carry on. Not very sophisticated. And in fact, I was looking on my bookshelf and I saw this. This was one of my first selling books, John Fenton, How to Sell Against the Competition. And the thing I love is, A, the slimy white suit, which is quite remarkable, but the boxing gloves. So you can see what you were setting ourselves up for was basically a bit of a fight. Which was never going to work well. So we then started getting into solution and consultative selling. So in my time in the advertising space, that was all about, you didn't just ship a bit of kit, you went, you set it up, you showed them how it worked, you did all of that, you know, that service to make it a real experience for them. Then we got into spin selling, you know, situation, you've got a particular situation, you've got a problem, what is the implication of that, and how are you then going to solve that? Then, how many people have lost business to do nothing? Many, many times, is my experience. It's, in fact, the biggest reason we don't get to move forward. So the Challenger sales model was designed to try and help unpick that lock, basically, by instead of people being happy with the status quo, nothing broken, to actually challenge that there's a better way, to actually put forward, you know, and one of the way of doing that was an exercise called value stream mapping, which is particularly true in tech sales, where you say, here's your current as-is process, and here's your to-be process. Wouldn't that be better? You know, less process steps, less cost, faster, all of that stuff. And doing that mapping exercise was one of the tools in the Challenger sales model. Then, of course, we've talked about inbound sales and social and account-based a little bit with the HubSpot example, and they're very real. We use SalesLoft with regular cadences outbound, and I was just chatting beforehand with Rachel about, you know, some of the developments that she's seeing in you know, using AI in those sort of approaches. You don't need to write this stuff anymore. You can basically automate its creation depending on the personas that you're wanting to target. So this stuff becomes so much easier to do. But of course, there is a challenge with that more and more as people are getting immune to it. They're saying, yeah, I've seen it before, kind of tired of it. So what we're seeing in technology sales in the last 3 to 4 years, and we've been immersed in it in the last 10 months, 12 months, because we've built a dedicated practice, is the move to a business consultant, a true business consultant. And with that, you don't talk about software and technology. You're actually talking about financial impact and financial implications. And so I would ask that we're very careful with this, because this is pretty confidential stuff. This is a pursuit we've got at the moment. This is with Siemens. I think everyone has heard of the Siemens organisation. And what we're doing here is we're benchmarking them against their peers. So you can see, General Electric in there, Schneider, ABB, Philips are typically what they would consider to be their peers. And what we're doing is across those key metrics, financial metrics, we're showing how they compare to their peers. And you can see that in revenue growth, they're lagging. Conversely, they are, pretty much top of the tree or near the top of the tree in days in inventory. And these are the things that we can positively impact. And on the right-hand side, we then hypothesize about what a 1% improvement or a 2%, whatever the customer's willing to give to. But what we're trying to do here is really go into an executive level conversation. We're not talking about labeling. In fact, we don't mention Loftware Cloud Enterprise, which is our lead product, or SmartFlow. Nothing gets mentioned here. This is purely to an executive, a financial conversation about where your technology can make an impact. And we then take that down into a value tree, shareholder value, which is obviously why the board is there, whether it's private or public. Public's obviously easy to get the data. And then looking at the value source, it's either making profit or it's improving the return on the capital. And they're the value types in the middle. And then on the right-hand side is our value levers, the things that we can positively impact. So you can see sales volume, cost of goods sold, SG&A, and I'll pick on the SG&A because we saw that was where there was the biggest problem for the Siemens organisation. So, reduce relabeling at goods in. For us, big problem is that people, would you believe, ship things and then they spend time relabeling them to be able to move them within their own premises. So that's a big cost. But being able to really drill into that from your perspective, and I realise that a sales value of, 10,000 ARR a year, annual recurring revenue a year, isn't justifying this sort of, it's real sledgehammer to crack a nut. But if you're if you're trying to get into a different level of conversation in a £50 million organisation, I think more and more we have to think about how are you going to drive and make a business difference within that organisation? Because back to what I said earlier, 570 different products just in sales and marketing. How are you going to sift through that lot and decide what's going to have a positive impact unless someone helps you determine how that is? And who is better to do that than someone in, selling, basically? So, incidentally, this is a guy called Eric Shaver has created this as a method. Lexicon is his training company. He claims to have trained 19,000 sellers. So this isn't something that's just, a bit out on the right, a bit hype. And all of the SAP organisation. In fact, we've got someone from SAP who is running this for us inside our organisation. So I conclude, I've always been told you need to go away with 3 things, and I realised there's a lot sort of in there, and I was jumping around a little bit. So I thought I'd try and summarise 3 sort of takeaways. One, Mr. Eisenhower, in preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning indispensable. And I think that's so true. One of the things I see with our guys and the discipline that I'm having to get them into is, an account plan today for us is sitting outside of our systems. It's sitting in a PowerPoint deck. Makes it difficult to update. We are looking to fold that into our Salesforce system next year, but it is a living, breathing thing. And what I get into, so every week I hold account reviews, and I have an account review session, and I name out which accounts I expect to be able to review with the team. I do the same with an opportunity review. So it really drives that behavioural change, because there's an old saying, isn't there? You've got to inspect what you expect. And if you don't do that, as in sales management, then rarely does it get done, because salespeople are lazy, brutally. They'll get to the short circuit. The other one is you've got to know how you're going to hit your goal and hit your target. I see so many salespeople say, that's a big quota. Yeah, we'll have a go. you know, and yeah, okay, so how are you going to go about, you know, attaining it? First of all, you've got to just understand what the metrics look like. So this is something that I picked up when I did a course at Cranfield on, actually it was their business, I've forgotten what they call their business growth program. And this, I think, is applicable for everyone. So you probably can quickly appreciate the maths. So I've got a quota of $500,000. I've got, or pounds, sorry, I'm in the UK. £10,000 is your average order value. And your conversion rate is 25%. So, you know, you can quickly do the maths and say, right, well, I need 200 opportunities. And the only way that you can change that, because it's fact, basically, is to either influence the average deal value or convert more. But it's a conversation, a grown-up conversation that you can have with a salesperson to say, you know, what's going to change? And then last but not least, because I know I'm overrunning, I'm surprised I haven't had my plug pulled, you know, like in a gig, you know, poof, is just focus on the outcome. I was at a fascinating discussion a couple of weeks back in Hilti, in Liechtenstein, a big power tools, professional power tools organisation you may have heard of. It's about 7 billion Swiss franc, big old business. But they really have established a complete approach to their selling group in giving them data points that allows them to really bring to life the outcomes that the customers are trying to get in terms of the usage of their tools and whether they've optimized their tool park. But it's all about the whole, it's not about the drill in that case. And that is me. Thank you for listening. Just sorry, around the outside is just some of the things I've hit upon. Lexicon I mentioned earlier, Medic, that's a UK, Andy White, UK-based sales organisation. I quite like Jeb Blunt at Sales Gravy, he does some podcasts. They're good to get into. Corn Ferry, they now own the strategic selling, and that's where Richard and I spent a bit of time back in the day. Miller Hyman strategic selling program. Huthwaite is Spin, Neil Rackham. Chasm Institute, Crossing the Chasm, quite interesting. They do some great work in terms of if you're at an early stage and how you cross the chasm, what are the things in crossing the chasm that you need to take into account. National Sales Conference, if you haven't done it, it's worth a thought. If you want to tune your sales and see some of that dreaded 570 technology pieces, they're often there. And if you do want to start to get a professional qualification, there is the Institute of Sales Professionals, if you haven't heard of it. Thank you very much. Questions, anyone?
I've got a couple of questions.
Yes.
Just a couple of anecdotes. There's actually an updated version of that partner study that was released last year, which actually shows an even more aggressive skew towards customers self-learning before they approach suppliers. It's Harvard Business Review did an article about it called Sense Making for Sales as well. That goes on site. That's really interesting. Yeah. What do you think with the advent? I mean, I'm just starting an AI business. I'm the director of sales strategy for a startup in Barcelona.
Oh, really?
There's a lot of familiar stuff.
You're like, sit down.
No, I'm good. I'm fine. But thank you.
Okay.
Now, we're seeing at the moment a huge increase. I'm sure everyone's getting more cold calls, right? I've noticed that. I'm also getting a lot more like AI calls now.
Right.
I'm also seeing huge amounts of AI personalized outreach, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm ignoring all of it. Yeah. Right? I'm completely desensitized to it. And I think we're seeing a market now that's moving towards more PLG, product-led growth, and kind of being thought leaders, experts in that space, and becoming those people as marketing strategies. Yeah. How do you think that's going to affect the sales landscape? And also, those things are incredibly difficult to measure because they're almost like brand-based marketing, thought leadership-based marketing, which can be very difficult to justify in terms of spend. So there's a bit of kind of there's a few questions in there. I'd like your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thought leadership is something I think we all aspire to within our space. I mean, we've got some level of fortune because we are the biggest. Biggest, I'm not saying, jumping up here saying is best, but just by market presence. Having said that, in Europe, because we were a function of acquisition, we've got one of the tasks we've had to do is overcome the brand awareness. So Loftware was not a known name in Europe. It was actually one of the businesses that I came from, Nice Label, crap name, really crap name, but that was where it came from. So people are more familiar with that. So in answer to, so we were always thought leadership. One of the things we're finding is that thought leadership position is all well and good, but I think it is a little bit of a function of what space you're in, because we have to accept that we're in an operational function. We're believing we're going to disrupt that with how we approach it, but nonetheless, the type of people that are tuning into that are not necessarily always looking at thought leaderships, because what we find is the people who really, the executives that we're trying to engage with, send out people at more operations to do the detail. So if you're at too thought leadership, then the people doing the research, they get lost in your website because it tends to be too high level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think it's trying to get that balance, and we haven't got it right. We constantly are having that conversation with ourselves about how to get that right between expressing what you do so you can do the research that, as you say, 83% or whatever, if it's now even more aggressive, is carrying on. Because if you make that difficult, it's actually also problematic.
And just one kind of follow-up to that.
Yeah.
For smaller businesses, are you familiar with the Lanchester strategy?
No, I've got to say I'm not. No.
It might. Yeah. So just for small businesses, if you're interested, really quickly. The Lanchester strategy is basically, it was a general from the World War, and what he calculated was that if you're outgunned, you should try and pick smaller battles when you're trying to do your sales and marketing. So instead of trying to look like a big company, use being a small company as one of your biggest advantages and make it more human. And I kind of see in the AI world, where everyone's getting automated outreach, that those kind of tactics are going to be the things that are going to differentiate.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. As I say, I don't know the strategy. I think what I encourage my sellers to do is be more, strategic in their thinking and be more narrower. We had a tendency. So when I first took this role, our enterprise sellers had and I would encourage you to look at, they had 1,600 accounts. Well, how the hell are you going to make any sense of 1,600 accounts? It's just ludicrous. So, one of the things I did immediately was to refine that down to, I call it the Focus 30, and in Pursuit 5. And to your point, you really do need to double down, and you need to be armed with the right information to have a proper conversation with executives in that organisation. Because if you rock up with a very general message, you're lost. You really are. So I think you're right. It's about refining down and being much more focused about where you're doing, whether that's in enterprise selling or you're an SME trying to penetrate a smaller account. You'll be really laser focused on what you're doing and very determinant about it. I would agree.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Thanks for the questions.
I got a question.
Yeah.
What's the favourite thing you've sold, and what's the best sale Beano you've been on?
Sorry, I didn't quite get this.
What's your favourite thing that you've sold?
The favourite thing that I've sold.
What's the best sales incentive or Beano you've been on?
Wow, there's a question. Well, one of the...
So tights, remember?
Yeah. What more could you want than selling tights? Well, that was probably not my favourite, that's clear. Well, probably actually one that Richard was around when I completed the sale to a retailer that remained anonymous. Yes, the
Anonymous one.
that anonymous one. Yeah, which was a seven-figure sum. In the time was quite rewarding to have done as a personal contribution. Consistently growing the business where I'm at the moment. We've had year-over-year growth between 15 and 18%, which has been very satisfying from the partner side. I'm now trying to fix the enterprise business, which is a little bit more challenging than the partner business was. Best Beano, blimey, that's a...
Do they still have them in enterprise sales, software sales?
Well, we've actually, it's really interesting that, if you want to have fun, don't get a private equity investor. There's one sage piece of advice I would give, because fun is something they like to remove at a heartbeat. But no, we are trying to sort of bring back the, Admiral Club or whatever you want to call it. But that's not been something that I've had here. Probably Kodak in my time there. I was running a couple of business lines in Kodak. We did have a very good event in Malta one year when I don't quite understand where the money came from, to be brutally honest, because Kodak was in a pretty sorry state. The good thing was the print business. I mean, I think I always want to try and set the record straight on Kodak because, everyone said, oh my God, you were part of that car crash. And true, it was a car crash. Antonio Perez, God bless his soul, knew how to really screw up a business. But the business to business side was extremely successful. We were making, 25-30% EBITDA. We were very strong. It was the consumer business that was a complete write-off and a vanity project to say, I smile whenever I say it now, but was let's take on HP at the office printing game. A home office printing game. How wrong can that go? Extremely wrong. $1 billion later wrong. And it was that sort of thing that drove Kodak into a cliff. They actually had, the charge coupling device, that was what was the salvation for many years for Kodak, was basically suing people left, right and centre for patent infringement. We had a team of 100 lawyers whose day was just going out and getting money from patent infringements. Sorry, I digress. But you can see it's a little bit, Kodak was definitely a story. It wasn't good, but it was a story of two halves, to use the football analogy.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things I was intrigued with is the Gartner report, which you talked about. 61% of people prefer not to have a rep involved, but then you also say that 78% of people have taken a cold call and appointments come from that cold call. So it sort of goes against each other.
Yes.
And my experience is actually, you have to address and you have to get in at some stage, and unfortunately, your dog wouldn't work, but a Rottweiler might at the start of a sales cycle. Yeah. You need someone to get in there in the first place. Yes. You need to get over the wall, and at that stage, then you can be introduced to people who are pleasanter, and then the next, then the stage at the end when you're actually you're going through the agreement and the terms and condition, all of a sudden it becomes very difficult again, and that's another stage which is extreme passion and aggression at some stage. And then once you're over that and when you deliver, then you can bring the nice people in again. So I do think there is a need to get in there in the first place, and the point is that cold calling or however you do it, it has to be done. Otherwise, you haven't got that relationship going. And I assume that actually people have taken an appointment from a cold call, but they know something of the company. They have some inkling, or they trust you, or something like that. Because obviously,
oh yeah, I mean, you've got the elevator pitch, as the old expression goes. There's got to be, I see, in the case where I was at the event, I see Loftware, they're very interested in supply chain. We have 660, I can't remember the exact number, of supply chain executives from companies all based in the Netherlands. Would you like to meet them? I mean, it's a very easy thing to process. But if it's, have you got some time I want to talk to you about, and before you know it, you've got to be really succinct, to the point, and on message, and as you say, have some empathy for what I'm trying to do and what's important to me.
Yeah, and all that has to be packaged up in a very short space of time. Yeah. That's why I was useless at it. But there are people who are good at it, and actually the best possible way of introduction is through a referenceable account. And I think it's important when you talked about bad business. Yeah. Bad business means that you get unhappy customers, and you can, in some respects, and we've done this, sell software to anyone for a lot of money, and so you can push it on them. But ultimately, if it doesn't work, then there's negative vibes which go around the industry. So it's important to try and target someone where there's a chance of it working.
Yeah, that's interesting.
A good chance.
Yeah,
and actually, I heard actually with Oracle, and I think actually, unfortunately, that some of the most the most successful sales companies in the software space are the ones who have the most aggressive sales teams. And I remember, I don't know who it was with, when I was talking to the Oracle folks, they said you always need to be selling 17% above what the product can do, because the competitors are.
Do you not think that's changed in recent years? So if you look at, recent examples would be Cursor, Snowflake, OpenAI.
I think it's. I absolutely agree. It has changed, because actually there's no money changing hands when people actually use it to start off with. So it actually needs to do a certain amount of what it's capable of doing. But I still think there's plenty of smoke and mirrors with some of the larger companies, in the SaaS companies, even if they are giving it away, or it's you download it and you get to use it for a certain period of time. It needs to do a certain amount of functionality, but then when you get deeper, it may not do that. But I agree with you. But I think there is a need. I think the point based on your 61% of people not wanting a rep involved, and 78% of people actually taking an appointment. There's a need to be in there, and maybe they're not called a rep, but someone needs to get in there and have the message. And I think when you've got a smaller business, that person quite often is the owner of the business, and I think that is if they can have that relationship or speak to that person, it's the most powerful thing, because if you are speaking to someone high at the top. So the question is, how do they get in the first place and have that?
Just to your point, so I have had in the last week calls with the head of US Oracle, head of GCP, the USA and Los Angeles, and the head of AWS, right, to make some very big decisions about purchase. But I'm setting up my own small business as well as side. Small business, I haven't got time to have a long, in-depth conversation with their SVP of North America for Oracle, because I literally just want to buy the quickest thing I possibly can. And so I'm not going to involve myself with a salesperson. But the in-depth conversation I need to, which is a sort of a larger scale because there's a lot more money involved, I absolutely need to speak to a salesperson, because that business consultant role is, I'm not actually buying you, I'm buying your network to make sure that this decision is going to be right. And so for a small business owner, it's like, oh yeah, I can plug in OpenAI and I can slap in a bit of Anthropic and just ask a couple of questions and give me a good solution. But that's just it. It's a good best fit solution. That solution is going to be the one that actually delivers the most value, because at the end of the day, that's what I really want. And so there's a sort of like your self-serve or the self-serve thing is like, I think it's the market, it's the actual purchasing person, it's the value that I need. Just a little bit of slap it on and do whatever, that's great. But the real good value is going to come from your network. It's not going to come from just buying that quick off the shelf stuff.
I think the other thing that's at play here, and I know I keep sort of belaboring the point about outside investment, but there's an astonishing stat. I think 85% now of the technology companies have some form of private equity investment that are scaling, and their objective is quite different to sometimes the users that are, to your point, accessing these products. And you're saying about freemium. I mean, freemium is a great model for the right people. And in fact, the business that I was, Nice Label, that was the way often we would get customers. Basically, they had a good experience, so they'd say, well, I'll do more of that and I'll spread it out. But when you're creating enterprise value, there's much more of a pressure to basically, come back to landing big. Landing and with all due respect, serving you with 2 users or 6 users or 10 users is really not very interesting to enterprise value. You've got to be landing a 5.9 million deal.
It's interesting as well. So HubSpot did a call today, which was where they laid out the sort of 5 main sort of ways of converting sales. Top one is social media. Second one is networking community. Right at the bottom of that list is product-led growth and ad conversions. Yeah. Okay. And so if you're running a PLG business, for example, on a freemium model, you're going to get a very small level of conversion rate, but you have to have a pricing ladder and you have to know your conversions. Okay, and understand the funnel. So I've run PLG companies. So with a PLG, you've got to really sort of understand how to convert that funnel. But the thing is, that comes back to your best way of actually converting is network every single time.
Yes.
So the HubSpot figures skewed a bit there because people who are doing kind of freemium models and things like that may not necessarily be using things like HubSpot because it's a different type of sales cycle. So
but that's a fair point. So for example, you want to get a really good freemium model that's worked, OpenAI, right? It's converted. I think they're now worth what, 175 billion or something this morning.
Debatable.
It's a big number.
That's what they tell people. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good conversion model, right? You go, okay, I've used this. I'm definitely going to spend my $19 a month to convert over. So those big freemium models which are working, Midjourney, those ones with PLG, they're working really well, but they've got a fucking amazing product right now, which everyone wants to buy into because it does everything.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing, I think, in the enterprise SaaS market as well, we're seeing people, like I mentioned, Snowflake, other people like Wiz Security and things like that, which are going from 1 million to 100 million at a pace that's unheard of without, they're kind of halfway between product-led growth. It's because the product is really good. They still have the aggressive sales teams. And you end up with this kind of balance between the two, where it's, like you say, you need the network, you need that outreach, and cold calling's a weapon, right? I was in sales for a big American tech firm, and cold calling was an absolute lifesaver. It's like down in a pipeline, make 100 phone calls, find some pipeline. And genuinely, I've closed deals like circa 2.7 million from a cold call. And yes, it was right market, right time. I had intel and all that kind of stuff, but it can't be underestimated.
You don't close a 2.7 million deal on enterprise level, excuse me, through a PLG strategy that deal alone. That I don't think.
But I think the thing is that you're into growth sales. You're into growth sales.
It comes back to what you're selling, who you're selling it to, who your audience is, the value of.
But if you look at the deals that Anthropic are closing now, or the deals that OpenAI are closing with their enterprise products, where they're closing these huge deals, they started as PLG, and then they're not going to hunter salespeople, they're going to growers and farmers who are working those accounts. And we're seeing people like Microsoft are transitioning to FDEs, so forward deployed engineers. So they're putting forward deployed engineers who work in those organizations and build out that technology with that customer to build those deals. But it's no longer really a sales process, it's turning into an engineering process.
Well, that's sort of the customer success and TAM model.
That's right.
Pardon?
I recognise some of those models. You're trying to come around there.
There's actually one of the strategies I'm working on at the moment is where we look at cluster grouping around just email addresses. Like, is that Microsoft? Right, let's get into Microsoft. Let's make our cold calls in there, to your point, understand where that power play is, and make sure that you build that network within Microsoft, based purely from an engineering issue, which is, okay, we've done a freemium model, we know there's a grouping here of people that we want to be able to attack, let's go after them.
I mean, you don't close anything over like 1 million really without having a village of people involved from both companies, right? It's very rare that you get an order from like 2 people engaging for anything over 1 million. You end up with engineers, customer success.
Unless it's a vanity play for the CEO.
You end up with a multi-level, multi-departmental, often multifunctional decision as well, which means that you're talking to different departments, potentially different geos, potentially different levels of the business. You're engineering at the bottom level while selling value to the top level. Sales is just so nuanced with a lot of these things, and every deal and customer can be unique. I really like what you said about motivation. Like a lot of the time you'll have a new CIO come in and it's like, oh brilliant, he wants to leave his mark. And you start there basically rubbing your hands together because you know he's got a personal motivation to go and do something transformational in the business. And being blunt about it, you can play on that.
No, absolutely. Very true. That's the signals that you've got to. But I think it's there isn't a one size fits all. That's, I think, one of the things I would emphasise. It's understanding, and the cost of pursuit, I think, has gone up. You know, we talk about AI as being a magic term. It's phenomenal, and really shame on any salesperson, frankly, who's going in ill-equipped into a sales situation, because it's so readily available, that information, if you take the time to do it. The issue is that you can't do that, across 50 accounts. You can't become an expert across 50 accounts. So you have to choose your battles, and that becomes actually where the skill of the seller is as well. To your point, new CIO, right, okay, how can I network into that CIO and get an audience with them soon before she's built out their program of work and I'm not on it?
And one of the things that I've learned in my sales career, it's not quite as long as yours and distinguished as yours.
Well, distinguished,
but walking away is one of the most important skills in salespeople. It's going, this is a waste of time. Looking at the average cost of customer acquisition right now, people are banding around figures in tech for about $12,000 as an average cost of customer acquisition.
Right.
In total, that's across brand marketing, sales process, sales time. And actually, I think that's quite low when you get into some deals, especially if it's a net new technology or something that changes the path of operations. I've worked deals for 2 years. Teams of 3 or 4 people trying to.
Oh, for sure.
But the whole walking away. Obviously, walking away early on is one thing. Walking away late,
is different.
and I think So, okay, we have to walk away. But the and we can carry on talking. Actually, hopefully. Can we carry on?
But are you talking more like the sunk cost fallacy when you walk away too late, or are you just talking like you just allowed in so much effort? It's just like
I'll carry on going. But if it's not going well, and also then you can't deliver. But someone needs to be sort of the person who says this is not working, and even if it does work, the product's not going to work or the service isn't going to work. So. Then we're going to have even more of an issue. And actually, being brave enough to do that, I agree, it's a difficult one. I enjoyed the fact when I had my own company that if I didn't like the company or didn't like the people I was speaking to, I just said, I'll give you the competitors. So I had a motto that I didn't want to deal with any sunset companies and people who sell guns, which are a lot of companies actually in the States. But that was primarily because I wanted to make sure the customers we took on board would get along with the other customers, because our user community, our network of people, that's what we sold. We didn't actually have salespeople, and I made a song and dance of it on the website saying, we'll actually save you, we'll save you money because we haven't got salespeople. That was absolute trash because we had salespeople because I was doing the sales, and so, but we didn't call ourselves salespeople at the time. But part of it was the biggest sales base we have, which I think actually the people in this room, they're successful because they basically work well to make their customers happy, and their customers then, are the sales people who then sell on to other people. And how you motivate those customers to sell, that network, what incentives are you giving them to sell? How can you basically, and when we did sales calls, reference sites calls, our customers would come back and say, how do we deal with this? So we had a sort of, this is what the questions they're going to ask you. And they said, well, how are we going to answer this? And so we allowed them. So we were heavily dependent on using our customers. And therefore we didn't want customers to come into that group of people who were alien. And so that was the biggest thing for me, is like, okay, we win them as a customer, but do these people we're dealing with want to mix with other people in this ink? And if the answer was, I don't think they would, we would then back out of that. Yeah. So we were also always matching the customers because we didn't just like what they were doing, or the fact, they had some political views which I wasn't akin to. It's just not the right way to run a large company, but it was your privilege. It's an enjoyable way to run a successful, smallish company.
You better not go on the Loftware website because we're crowing about Sig Sauer at the moment. So,
your CAC, your cost of customer acquisition from referral business, is insane, and your deals close quicker.
Yeah.
And your deal velocity is higher, and often you can get in at a higher sale where you're almost kitchen sinking a customer with all your products from day one. Right? You end up with a higher lifetime value and a lower cost of customer acquisition.
Do we have another question from the back before we close this up? Because Ben's going to switch everything off in a second, and we have got about 20 minutes to have a chat over a beer. So maybe we do that. That's okay. Anyway, actually, I did want to finish by saying that Nigel's talking about the fact that academia and all that sort of stuff. But I was listening to all this, and I know Nigel very well, and this is the most, to me, this is incredibly academic, this whole art of selling. I don't want to say the art of the deal, because everyone says the deal nowadays. I mean, no one used to say that. We always used to say agreement, something like that. But Nigel's had a lifetime experience in this, and it really does show. And his ability to keep so many plates spinning and get in the minds of people who are going to buy whatever the product you're going to sell to them, and constantly 24 hours a day do that. I mean, I think it's a testimony, and I think we've seen a bit of that tonight. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing that with us, Nigel.
Awesome.